You don't belong in this lobby. I don't know how you got past the front door, but I'm going to need you to leave before I call security." Those words, said loud enough for everyone in the marble atrium to hear, said to a woman standing in the center of a hotel she had built from the ground up on land she had purchased with her own money, in a city that had told her no 17 times before she finally said, "Fine, I'll do it myself." The woman didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She looked at the man who had just said those words, Gerald Whitmore, general manager, silver name badge, blue pocket square, the kind of man who had learned confidence from a handbook. And she tilted her head just slightly, the way someone does when they're deciding how much patience they have left. She had quite a bit, as it turned out. She always did. Her name was Claudette Moss, and this was her hotel. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning Chicago gets right before winter decides to stop being polite. The wind off the lake had a bite to it. The leaves on Michigan Avenue were almost entirely gone inside the Alderton, a 32-story luxury property in the heart of the Gold Coast with 280 rooms, a Michelin-starred restaurant on the fourth floor, and a rooftop bar that had been written up in every major travel publication in the country. It was warm and quiet, and exactly the kind of place that made people feel like the world had some order to it after all. Claudette had not planned to stop in that morning. She had a board meeting at 2 o'clock, a call with her architect at noon about the new property in Atlanta, and a standing breakfast with her oldest friend Renata, who made the best sweet potato biscuits in the state of Illinois and refused to share the recipe with anyone. The plan had been breakfast, call, meeting, done. But she passed by the hotel on her way and noticed something. The planters by the main entrance, the large stone ones she had specifically ordered from a family-owned company in Portugal, the ones that had taken 4 months to arrive, were empty, bare soil, no seasonal planting, nothing. She had sent a note about this 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, last week. So she stopped. She was wearing dark jeans, a camel-colored wool coat she'd had for 12 years because she liked it and didn't need a reason beyond that, and flat boots that had seen better days. No jewelry except the small gold studs she always wore, the ones her mother had given her the morning of her college graduation. Her natural hair was out, silver at the temples now, cropped clothes. She carried a tote bag with a broken strap she kept meaning to replace. She did not look like what people expected when they heard the words founder and owner of the Alderton Hotel Group. She never had. She had long since stopped caring about that. Gerald Whitmore had been general manager of the Alderton Chicago for 11 months. He had been hired by her VP of operations while Claudette was in London, closing a deal on a property in Mayfair. She had reviewed his resume, approved the hire, and met him exactly once, briefly, at a company-wide leadership summit in March, in a room with 40 other people. He had not retained her face. This was not particularly surprising. Plenty of people didn't. What was surprising? What always managed to surprise her, even now, even after everything, was the speed of it. How fast the calculation happened. How little information a person needed to decide that someone didn't belong somewhere. She had walked through the front doors at 8:14 in the morning. She had stood in the center of the lobby for approximately 90 seconds, looking up at the atrium ceiling, checking the light quality, noticing that the floral arrangement near the elevator bank was slightly wilted and needed to be replaced. She had pulled out her phone and typed a note. Gerald Whitmore had appeared from the direction of the concierge desk, moving with the particular energy of a man who considers himself the authority in every room he enters. "Excuse me," he said, not unkindly at first. "Can I help you with something?" Claudette looked up from her phone. "I'm fine, thank you." "Are you a guest here?" "No." That single word seemed to confirm something for him. His posture shifted. His chin came up. "This is a private lobby," he said. "It's for hotel guests and registered visitors. If you're not a guest, I'm going to have to ask you to." "I'm aware of the policy," Claudette said. "I wrote it." Gerald Whitmore blinked. He looked at her coat, her bag, her boots. He decided she was being difficult. "Ma'am," he said, and the word had an edge to it now, I don't know what that means, but I need you to understand that I am the general manager of this property, and I am asking you, politely, to step outside." She looked at him. "You're asking me to step outside?" "Yes, I am." "Of my hotel. This is not." He stopped. Started again. "I don't know what you've been told, but this hotel is privately owned and—" "I know it's privately owned," Claudette said. "I own it." There was a pause, the kind that stretches. "Ma'am." "Gerald." She said his name the way people say a name when they already know it, when they've known it for some time, when they've signed the paperwork that put it here. "My name is Claudette Moss. I founded this company in 2003. I opened this property in 2019. I approved your hiring last November. And I am standing in my own lobby at 8:15 in the morning because I sent 3 separate notes about the front planters and they are still empty." She paused. "That's the only reason I came in today. The planters." He stared at her. She waited. He started. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "Just don't, right now. I need to speak to the head of facilities. Can you get me Darren?" Gerald Whitmore got her Darren. He also, in the 11 minutes that followed, turned a color that could only be described as a specific shade of regret. Here's what Claudette did not do in those 11 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand an apology. She did not perform anything for the 2 front desk associates who were watching from behind their station, with the fixed expressions of people trying very hard not to have visible reactions. She did not take out her phone and record anything. She did not say the words, "Do you know who I am?" because she had never said those words in her life, and she was not about to start now. She stood there and she waited for Darren from facilities, and when Darren arrived, a compact, efficient man in his early 40s who had been with the company for 6 years, she shook his hand, asked him how his daughter's soccer season was going, and then walked with him to the front of the building to talk about the planters. She knew his daughter played soccer because she had a policy, personal and non-negotiable, of learning one real thing about every person who worked in her buildings. Not their job title, not their performance review, one actual human thing. Darren's daughter was named Priya. She played goalkeeper. She was 12 years old, and according to Darren, absolutely fearless. Claudette had remembered this since their first conversation 2 years ago. Gerald Whitmore had worked in her building for 11 months and did not know her face. These things are not unrelated. Darren explained that the planting vendor had pushed back the seasonal installation by 2 weeks due to a supply issue with the winterberry holly she had specified. He had sent an update to the regional operations coordinator. Whether that update had made it up the chain was, apparently, unclear. Claudette told him to find an alternative vendor, get the planters installed by the end of the week, and send her the invoice directly. Darren nodded, made a note, and went to handle it. That was the conversation she had come for. It took 7 minutes. She was back on Michigan Avenue by 8:28. The wind was still sharp. She pulled her coat tighter and walked toward where her car was parked 2 blocks down. The old reliable Volvo she drove herself because she had never been entirely comfortable being driven around like something precious. She had a breakfast to get to. Renata's biscuits waited for no one. What happened next, Claudette didn't know about until the following morning. She learned it the way she learned most things about her own properties. From her chief operating officer, Simone, who had a gift for concise and complete information delivery, and who called at exactly 7 a.m., as she always did on mornings when there was something to discuss. "The Whitmore situation," Simone said by way of opening. Claudette was in her kitchen, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee, still in her robe, watching the pigeons argue over something on her fire escape. "What about it?" Word got out. Within the company? Within the company and beyond it. Simone paused. Apparently 2 of the front desk associates sent messages to people. Those people sent messages to other people. By last night, it was on 3 different industry group chats. The hospitality community in Chicago is not large. Claudette drank her coffee. "And," she said, "and Delaney Whitmore Group reached out this morning." Now Claudette was listening more carefully. The Delaney Whitmore Group, no relation to Gerald, was a private equity firm that had been in extended conversations with the Alderton Hotel Group for the better part of 6 months. They were interested in becoming a capital partner for the company's expansion into 4 new markets. The deal on the table was in the range of $65 million. It was not a small conversation. They reached out to cancel? Claudette asked. They reached out to say, Simone replied carefully, that they had some concerns about internal culture and leadership quality, and they wanted to schedule a call before deciding whether to proceed. Claudette set down her coffee cup. Who's their lead on this? Patricia Osei. She said she'd seen what happened and wanted to hear from you directly. Patricia Osei, Claudette knew, had built her own career in finance from nothing and had been passed over, talked over, and underestimated so many times. She had essentially built an entire investment philosophy around identifying companies that understood the value of people their competitors had dismissed. She was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of investor Claudette's company needed. Set the call, Claudette said. Already did, tomorrow at 10. And Whitmore? There was a pause. HR has been notified. The process is moving. This was Simone's way of saying, it's being handled. It was also, Claudette understood, the way of saying that it had been handled before anything else could happen. That was the thing about people like Simone. They didn't wait to be told twice. One more thing, Simone said. Go ahead. There are 11 documented complaints in his personnel file from the past 11 months. Guests, staff. 3 of them specifically mentioned bias in how he spoke to or treated guests of color. Claudette closed her eyes for a moment. 11, she said. 11. And nothing was flagged. There was a note after the 3rd one. It was marked reviewed. No action recorded. This was the part that people rarely talked about when they told stories like this one. The slap, or the public humiliation, or the dismissal, or whatever the specific incident was, that was the thing that made the story. But the story was never really about the incident. The story was about everything that came before it. The first complaint, the second, the third, the moment someone read a file and decided that reviewed was the same as resolved. The accumulation of small, uncorrected failures that made it possible for a large, visible one to happen. Gerald Whitmore had not woken up one morning and decided to be the kind of man who publicly humiliates a woman in her own lobby. He had become that man slowly. Accommodation by accommodation. Unchecked assumption by unchecked assumption. In a building where no one had made it uncomfortable enough to be otherwise. Claudette thought about the 2 front desk associates who had watched the whole thing and said nothing. She didn't blame them. They were doing the math that people in their position always have to do, the math of what it costs to speak up versus what it costs to stay quiet. She had done that math herself, early in her career, more times than she could count. She had spent the better part of 20 years trying to build companies where the math came out differently. Pull every complaint in the system from all 3 properties, she said. Anything marked reviewed with no follow-up action. I want them on my desk by Friday. Yes, Simone said. I'll have them to you by Thursday. The call with Patricia Osei happened the next day at 10, as scheduled. Claudette took it from her home office, a quiet room on the 2nd floor of her brownstone in Hyde Park, walls lined with books she had actually read, 2 plants she had kept alive for a combined total of 11 years, a photo of her mother on the desk that she looked at whenever a conversation was going to be hard. This one wasn't hard. Patricia Osei was 61 years old. She had grown up in Accra and in Cincinnati. She wore her hair natural and her voice was even and direct. And she did not waste words. I saw what happened, Patricia said. I heard it from 2 different sources who were independent of each other. I want to hear it from you. Claudette told her the whole thing exactly as it had happened. The planters. The lobby. Gerald Whitmore's face. What she said. What he said. What he said. The 11 complaints in the file. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Claudette was done, there was a brief silence. What did you do after? Patricia asked. I went to breakfast with my friend. She makes biscuits. Patricia made a sound that was almost a laugh. What are you doing about the underlying issue? I'm auditing every complaint file across the company that was marked reviewed with no corrective action. I'm instituting a monthly flag review at the COO level, and I'm bringing in an external facilitator to do a culture assessment at the Chicago property before the end of the year. Another silence, this one different in quality. You had already started on this before our call, Patricia said. The day before yesterday. You weren't waiting to see what we decided. No, Claudette said. I wasn't. This, Patricia Osei later told a colleague, was the moment she decided. Not the incident. Not the dignity with which Claudette had handled being humiliated in her own building. Not the elegance of the story or the rightness of the outcome. The moment that closed it for Patricia was the audit that had already started. The Friday deadline already started. The culture assessment already scheduled. The fact that Claudette Moss was not doing those things because $65 million was on the line. She was doing them because 11 people had put their concerns in writing and nothing had changed, and that was not something she was willing to let stand. The partnership agreement was finalized 6 weeks later. It was, as projected, in the range of $65 million. Gerald Whitmore's employment at the Alderton Chicago ended 4 days after the lobby incident. He was walked out by HR on a Thursday afternoon. The official reason cited in his separation paperwork was a sustained pattern of documented conduct violations, inconsistent with company values. 3 witnesses from the lobby incident had provided written accounts. 2 of them were the front desk associates who had watched in silence. And then, quietly, after he was gone, written down everything they remembered. Claudette sent them each a handwritten note, not an email, a note on paper in her own handwriting that said thank you for what you did and that she hoped they knew what it had taken for them to do it. She meant it. She knew exactly what it had taken. There is a version of the story that is about Gerald Whitmore, about the arrogance that comes from power without accountability, about the assumptions encoded so deep in some people that they operate without any awareness of them, about how quickly a person can destroy things they spent years building, a career, a reputation, a company's future, with nothing more than a few words said too loud in a marble lobby on a Tuesday morning in October. That version is true. But the story that stayed with Claudette, the one she told when she told this story at all, which was not often, was not about Gerald. It was about the planters. She had noticed something was wrong and she had said something 3 times. And no one had acted. And she had gone anyway, not to make a scene, not to catch anyone in a failure, but because the planters were empty and she had written the standard that said they shouldn't be, and standards only mean something if someone enforces them. She had shown up in her old coat and her broken strap bag on a cold October morning because she cared about the details. Not the grand gesture, not the dramatic entrance. The winterberry holly and the stone planters from Portugal. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. And the fact that a man had looked at her in her own lobby and decided, in 90 seconds, that she didn't belong, that said nothing about who she was. It said something about who he was and about the system that had let him go 11 months without correction, and about how much work was still left to do. But not about her. She had known who she was long before she could afford the lobby. She knew it now. She would know it on the days when no one else did. That, in the end, is the only kind of knowing that holds. I keep thinking about the planters. Not the lobby. Not Gerald's face when he finally understood what he had done. Not the $65 million or the phone call with Patricia or the HR paperwork that ended 11 months of unchecked behavior in a single Thursday afternoon. But keep thinking about the fact that Claudette showed up that morning because of empty stone planters. Because she had written the standard, and the standard wasn't being met, and that mattered to her. Not because anyone was watching, but because it was hers and she cared about it. That's the thing I can't stop sitting with. The way integrity works when no one's looking. When there's no audience. When the only reason to do the right thing is that you are, fundamentally, someone who does the right thing. Gerald made a calculation that morning without even realizing he was making one. He looked at a woman in a worn coat with a broken bag strap, and he decided, in about 90 seconds, that she didn't belong in a space she had built with her own hands. He wasn't thinking about consequences. He wasn't thinking at all, really. He was just operating on assumptions so old and so deep that they felt like instinct. And that's the most dangerous kind of wrong. The kind that doesn't know it's wrong. The kind that has never been made uncomfortable enough to examine itself. What undid him wasn't Claudette's title. It wasn't her money. It wasn't even the fact that she owned the building. What undid him was that she had spent 20 years building something real, real standards, real relationships, real accountability, and a man who had spent 11 months ignoring complaints, dismissing concerns, and coasting on unchecked authority simply could not survive contact with that. That's how it works, I think. Not as punishment, not as cosmic score settling, just as consequence. The choices we make every day, whether to speak up or stay quiet, whether to see the person in front of us or only the story we've already written about them, whether to handle the difficult thing or mark it reviewed and move on. Those choices accumulate. They become the architecture of who we are, and eventually the architecture shows. Claudette could have announced herself the moment Gerald approached. She could have made it easy for him to course correct before it went too far. She didn't. Not out of cruelty, and not out of strategy. She didn't announce herself because she had never needed a title to know her own worth. She had that long before she had the hotel, long before she had the lobby, long before any of it. That's the part I come back to, the part that feels true in a way I can actually use, not the outcome. The foundation, the kind of person you become through years of quiet, unglamorous, unwitnessed effort. Learning one real thing about every person who works for you, showing up for the details no one else tracks, building systems of accountability that outlast any single incident. That's not talent. That's not luck. That's a choice made over and over again in the ordinary moments when no one would notice if you chose differently. Gerald noticed the coat. Patricia noticed the audit that had already started. The difference between those two things is a whole life.